Alright, this is Division here with 14 Samurais. I figured I would start doing a video series when needed for the newer guys in Red Bull or people who cannot make the Tuesday night training if something interesting or there's a lesson to be learned. And last night we flew sortie, and there were some really key things that can be taken away from it. And I'd like to digest those things for you today. If people find this interesting, then I will continue to do this. If not, then this will be a one-time video. All right, so let's get into it because I don't want to make these videos too long. And we're here in TAC view. The mission is really not that important, but there's a few points in this mission that kind of highlight some communication um, key points that we should be aware of, some roles and responsibilities that people should be aware of, and lastly, the idea behind setting up a grinder and how that's effective. So let's just kind of go over the quick scenario here of what's happening in the first part of the video. First thing we got to know is that Stash here is Samurai 1-1, Division, which is myself, is Samurai 1-2, and Vengeance is Samurai 1-3. Before we approach this airspace, one key thing that should always happen in a flight is the flight lead, which is Samurai 1-1 here, should set up roles and responsibilities for the rest of the flight members. And in this case, we have already talked about it, and you're going to see how this plays out here shortly. But let's talk about what the rules and responsibilities were for this flight and how that is going to affect what happens next. So Stash had said that Samurai 1-2 and Samurai 1-3 are the primary two aircraft to deal with air threats. So if some bandits like we have here pop up to engage, it is my responsibility and Vengeance's responsibility to engage these targets. Stash's responsibility is two things. One, to remain as the tactical commander of the airspace, to be able to have perfect, quote unquote, situational awareness to make decisions on the fly so that we don't have to. It's much easier in these situations to just be told what to do and follow them so the game plan actually works out. And his other responsibility is any air-to-ground threats like surface-to-air missile sites that may be a problem. So right now, we are all carrying AMRAAMs and AIM-9s and 2 HARMs because of the mission that we are flying, and we'll get into that. So let's just kind of see how this plays out here in a minute. Here we have 2 enemy aircraft. They decided to be F-4Es today coming at us, and we are already in a very specific formation here. So here's the idea. Since we have roles and responsibilities, that allows us to set up certain things. And what we ideally want to be able to set up is what's called a grinder. And if you don't know what a grinder is, you can ask one of the guys in the flight, but I think by now everybody kind of knows the idea of a grinder. But if the bandits were on the left side here, then Samurai 1-2, the responsibility would be to engage the lead bandit. And if the bandits are in front or to the right, Vengeance's responsibility is to engage the lead bandit. And then the other person's supposed to be engaging the rear bandit or the next higher threat. So let's just kind of watch how this plays out. We're in 5 times speed. And this is about a mile spread. It's kind of hard to tell in TAC view. So I start to turn in just a little bit, and Vengeance is going hot. Here, Stash picks up some SA2 sites, and he is going to do the thing that his role responsibility is to do. So this doesn't even have to be communicated. I know by him turning direction here, one, he's deconflicting the airspace for us, so we're not worried about him being in the way, but also lets me know by the RWR that's going off in our cockpit that he is going to deal with the SA2. All right, so Vengeance decides to fire at maximum range, which is the right thing to do in the situation. And the reason why he's doing this is we want to set up the grinder. And what we need to happen is we need one of these aircraft to turn cold to defend this missile. This missile was shot at 29,000 feet. So that's a very good missile. The only thing that could have made the missile really better is if Vengeance had more speed. But this is fine. This is a good situation. My job now is to be shooting at the rear bandit. Unless the lead bandit easily defeats this missile and is coming in hot, then I have to re-engage him. But I want to hold my shot to create space between me and Vengeance, because I know the next thing that's going to happen is he's going to crank and then he's going to turn cold. And I am going to press forward, and that action creates the grinder. So that is ideally what we want to happen. This is not something that needs to be talked about in the flight. We are both experienced pilots, and we know what we're supposed to be doing. So as you can see here, Stash shoots out an AGM-88 at the first site that popped up on radar, and this other site has now gone live, and he is going to shoot an AGM-88. Now, his job and responsibility as flight lead now, or the guy who has now released both the harms in which he was carrying, is to also get into the grinder. All right, we want this circle of jets going hot and cold towards the enemy, where we can consistently be putting pressure on them with air-to-air ordnance. So you're going to watch Stash here, I hope, turn cold and set up the grinder, and Vengeance is going to eventually turn cold here. And my job now is to figure out which the next highest threat is. Typically, it would be the aft bandit, because Vengeance shot at the forward bandit because he should be defending, but sometimes things change. And I am going to press. The longer I press, the more space I give the grinder, which is key. All right, so I shoot my first missile at the next bandit, and now I'm going to crank to the right. I don't want to crank to the left because of the SAM sites. Now, look at this. This is exactly what you want to see. We're pretty much stacked on top of each other at different altitudes. We have Vengeance turning cold. We have Stash turning cold, and I'm going to be cranking, keeping that missile on my radar guidance all at the same time. So when I shoot, they start to turn cold. And that starts to create this beautiful space in the grinder to deal with these air threats. So let's just go to myself here real quick. All right. So the first missile gets dodged, and what you can see here is Stash and Vengeance are cold, and I am still turning hot. I have assessed the situation and determined that the thing that I need to do now is press a bandit. Now, this bandit is now turning hot towards me, but since I know that, and this doesn't really need to be communicated, one data link can kind of tell me what's going on, and that's the reason here. Another thing I forgot to point out is this green line indicates that I have Vengeance locked up in data link. Him being locked up in data link does a few things for me. One, I can just look at my Jehemics, this is the main thing, and I can figure out where he is at all times. So I know where we are at in the grinder. If we are both turning cold and a bandit's turning hot, that is a very bad situation, because we both have to turn into the bandit. So one of us has a really high chance of getting shot down. Now, I could use DMS switch right and see Stash, but it's probably going to select everything else on the data link before I get the Stash, so it's kind of annoying in the moment to be juggling all those things and whatnot. So it's just best that I keep it on to Vengeance. But Stash is already turning hot. Okay, and he doesn't even need to communicate this if he doesn't want to. I know from him saying Magnum twice that both his harms are gone, and that he is going to now do just the next role, the next thing to do. All right, so let's just play this video forward. This isn't even the main reason I made this video. It's coming up later. I send a Fox 3. At the same time, a Fox 1 gets fired on me, and I go defensive. Now, I know I have enough altitude, I have enough speed, that this missile is probably going to get defeated. But I don't know that for sure. It gets defeated, and now I have a situation where most pilots don't want to be in, where they are running cold, the bandit has some altitude advantage, and is within, I don't know, 10 miles, 5 to 10 miles on the tail. But for me, I am perfectly safe. I have altitude to play with. If I need to, I am going to climb because I haven't heard a missile notification and I am fast. But if he does shoot, I can G unload my jet to gain as much speed as possible in burner, and I can go defensive. But the main thing that happens here now is I notice via data link that Vengeance is turning hot into the grinder, but Stash has already turned hot. So we have the grinder set up. I'm going one direction, Stash is coming the other, and luckily for me, I have an extra wingman who is my original wingman, but the timing would have worked out the same. He could have just turned and bled some speed to be there earlier if he needed, but we are perfectly fine here. And Stash calls out a bra to this bandit. That's all he needs to say, and I know by him calling out the bra call to this bandit that he has him on radar, he has him on lock. So that call already tells me that he is the guy to shoot, even if Vengeance has a lock here. I think he's disciplined enough to know that he does not need to shoot. And Fox 3, splash. Okay, let's go to the next part of this video because it's getting long. Alright, at this moment in time, we get ambushed by two F-14s. We're off the deck trying to approach an SA-10 site, and there's some Phoenixes in the air. The person we want to watch here for the first little bit is Vengeance, on how he makes some very good tactical decisions, but there's a key point in this video and lesson that I want to point out. So me and Stash both get fired upon, and we are doing our best to go defensive. And Vengeance realizes in this situation that he was not fired upon, and so that his job is to put some pressure without overcommitting. So this is the key thing. He doesn't just overcommit into a 2v1 fight. He is putting pressure back on the enemy with an AM-120. Very difficult one for them to dodge. We are shooting up, so that is the one disadvantage, but we are relatively close, and that is a very good missile. Now, this third Phoenix gets fired, and when I call defensive, it is fired upon me. Stash is now going to turn back into the enemy. Vengeance now knows that his responsibility is to keep the pressure, and he has to turn in. This is what he has to do. There's another missile in the air, which means that he knows that at least one of us is not going to be able to support. Now, he could turn and run, and Stash could turn hot, but he already knows that Stash defeated the missile because the call was probably made. I think it was in the time, and he knows it's about to be a 2v2 fight. And he is now going for this F-14. He is going for the biggest threat. The closest threat is this guy here. This guy is still not the biggest threat, and I have defeated the missile, and I have turned hot. So let's just kind of watch how this plays out. This is probably the best view. All right, an AM-9, point blank to the face to an F-14. That's a very good shot. He hits the guy. Doesn't instantly kill him on the spot, but the aircraft loses control, is going to hit the ground. At this point, this F-14 releases another missile at me, and I have the missile in the notch. Now, I re-notch the missile. At this point in time, I tell him that I am once again defensive, and so Vengeance has to turn in. He could come back this way, and we could regroup, and it's a 3v1 with Stash coming in hot, and that would be a very good situation. But since I am defensive, and Stash is a little bit a ways, which is fine. It's not a problem. But that kind of lets him know that he has to get into a knife fight with this F-14. So let's just kind of watch how this unfolds. All right, so he is down to, I think, one AIM-9 and then guns. And I realize right here that I had perfectly notched the missile on this turn, and that this missile is now defeated, so I am turning hot to the support. And now he's in a pretty bad situation here. I'm not gonna say like horrible, but Vengeance is in a rolling flat scissors with an F-14. One mistake and it's bad. So I let him know missiles defeated. He knows help's on the way. Stash also lets him know that help's on the way. But now this little bugger, tricky bugger here, shoots a missile at Stash, forcing Stash to go defensive. But Stash does get an AM-120 out, but it gets dragged into the dirt. Okay. Now, here's the original reason for this whole lesson, is what happens next. Vengeance is down to guns, and this seems like a very good winning position, but this is still not a position you want to find yourself in. You have one teammate going cold, and you are in these mountain ranges with an F-14, and if you lose a little bit of situational awareness, you could easily find yourself in a bad position. Now, this isn't a losing position, so I don't want to dramatize this, but this is not the situation that you need to be in. And the point of this video is what happens next. I'm going to push that 14, but there's only one word that needs to be said that changes the whole outcome of this, and I use the word press, which means that I now have the better situation than Vengeance. When he hears the call press on the radio, which he does, when I say it, he is instantly going to turn away and turn cold to deconflict. He'll still be around the area to support if needed, but he knows that there's no point in him burning the fuel and getting into this position or being in this position any longer. So I say press. The second I said press, he turns cold and he gets slow. So that he is no longer in harm's way. Fox 2 and splash. So there was a lot of things in this video I wanted to point out, but I figured there's a lot that people could learn and just kind of see what naturally unfolds when there's experience and people put some time together. If this was informative or you liked it, let me know and we'll continue the series. You know, us in the 14th SAMs, the cadre here, just want to help everyone grow and be better. We're definitely not perfect and we're also growing as well, but there's always good lessons to be learned. Thanks again.